Welcome back to Friday Night Arcade. My name is Aaron, and this week we're going to be taking a closer look at some scary Sega Genesis games. First up, Splatterhouse 2, developed by Now Production and released for the Genesis by Namco in 1992. It's a beat-em-up sequel to Splatterhouse, which was originally released in the arcades and only got an official console release on the PC Engine. There is a plot to this game involving saving your girlfriend from a haunted mansion and wearing a mask that gives you all sorts of superpowers, but really it's just run to the right and beat the crap out of everything that moves with your fists, feet, or whatever you can find lying around. Think of it as Double Dragon, but with no friends and much more goopy. Pick up a bone and just smash them to bits. The music and graphics make for a spooky setting, and then combined with the grotesque enemies, this is sure to haunt your nightmares. The only thing more terrifying than the enemies is the play control. Everything is just not quite as responsive as it should be, and it makes for awkward jumping and some unfair deaths. At first I thought maybe something was wrong with my controller, but it turns out it's a pretty common complaint with this entry in the series. If you're into beat 'em ups, it's not bad enough to be a deal breaker, but you may have to repeat some levels. Thankfully, the game has a liberal save and password system, so you'll have plenty of chances to learn the enemy patterns. CastleVania Bloodlines, developed and released by Konami in 1994. It's always a good time to play Castlevania. Halloween, Christmas, Yom Kippur, honestly you don't need a reason, but also it's the only Castlevania game to get an official release on the Genesis or Mega Drive, so take it or leave it. Interestingly, the European version is titled Castlevania The New Generation, and that version is censored a bit. There's a story here about Dracula's niece, Elizabeth Bartley, concocting an unholy plot to trigger the First World War, and then using the countless souls of the dead from the war to gain enough strength to bring her good old Uncle Dracula back from the dead. You take up the mantle of John Morris or Eric Lecard, two sorta descendants from the Belmont family who have to once again swoop in and clean up the mess. Bloodlines is unique in that it's not unique. Before Konami went all Metroidvania with the series and Symphony of the Night, Bloodlines took it back to the series' roots with a good old-fashioned linear set of 6 stages. No branching pathways or alternate routes, just good old school frantic action. However, the game doesn't take place in Transylvania and instead has you fighting across Europe. It's an interesting twist, but honestly doesn't take away from the game for me. The core gameplay is still Castlevania with beautiful 16-bit graphics, a stellar soundtrack worthy of Castlevania, and several over-the-top boss fights. Zombies Ate My Neighbors, developed by LucasArts and released by Konami in 1993. You take control of a kid and have to save the neighborhood by defeating all sorts of monster movie cliches in top-down shooter form. Zombies, chainsaw-wielding murderers, UFOs, pod people, mummies, giant demon babies, and so forth. You also have to rescue the townsfolk, redneck barbecue guy, mean teacher, babies, soldiers, Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, even Fido. The game features over 50 levels and you clear a level by rescuing everyone in each level. The levels are short but are somewhat like puzzles. You have to navigate through buildings or over fences, finding keys to open doors and stuff like that. Once you find everyone, a door opens up and you can escape to the next level. You get points for however many people you rescue, and it's also possible for them to die if an enemy touches them before you get there. You also have to make do with all sorts of practical weapons, squirt guns, weed whackers, bazookas, whatever you can find. I love that, and it reminds me of using the yo-yo and baseball bat in Star Tropics. For the most part, it's stuff a kid would find lying around the neighborhood somewhere. There are also a variety of levels, from your own backyard to shopping centers, pyramids, and more, and there's a cool day-to-night transition that adds to the atmosphere. The humor in this game is awesome B-movie fare, and the idea that you're the only kid who knows what's going on and has to save everyone, including the adults, is a tried and true trope from the 80s. It reminds me of the movie Invaders from Mars, where the kid is the only one that knows aliens are taking over the town, and the adults all think he just has an overactive imagination. Or Fright Night, where the teenager thinks a family of vampires has moved in next door, and everybody just thinks he's seen one too many monster movies. The entire concept of Stranger Things is practically centered around this. What makes this game work, along with the quirky humor, is the impressive graphics and smooth play control. Your character looks like something off of MTV in the 90s with his 3D glasses, and the enemies all look unique and richly detailed. If I had to nitpick, the only thing I could find bad to say about this game is the hit detection when you're picking up items. It doesn't feel like it's as precise as it should be. It also gets notoriously difficult in the later stages, but it also has a great couch co-op feature, so get yourself a buddy and have at it. Well, this is more like it. Splatterhouse 3. The man in the mask is back, and this time he looks like Jason X. This is more Double Dragon-like action, and you can even move around in 3 dimensions a bit. However, this time instead of a standard side-scroller, the story takes you to a mansion where you have to navigate around in a non-linear format. You move around beating the holy hell out of hideous-looking monsters that are all incredibly detailed. Once you clear out a room, all of the doors will open. Then if you pause the game, you get a map screen telling you where you're supposed to go. Here's a tip though, if you pause the game while there's still enemies in the room, you won't be able to see your map. You have to clear out all the enemies, then pause the game to see it. Don't be like me and keep running around like an idiot for 5 minutes before I figured that out, because there's a time limit on each level, and this probably is my only complaint about this game. There's just not much time to get to the end of each stage. If the time runs out, you can still keep playing, but this affects how the story unfolds, and you get a much more depressing ending where your girlfriend gets killed. I could do without the time limit, because otherwise what's the incentive to try and explore all of the stage? Other than that, the game actually plays much better than Splatterhouse 2 with superior play control and responsiveness. And now for something completely different. Haunting starring Polterguy, developed and released by EA in 1993. This is one of the most unique games I've ever come across. For starters, it's an isometric game, which is just something you didn't see every day on a home console. It feels more like a computer game in that respect. The story goes that you, the Polterguy, were killed in a skateboarding accident. Turns out the skateboards were defective because the sleazy owner, and I'm not making this up, Vito Sardini, the sleazy owner, set up an overseas factory. He was too cheap to hire qualified workers, so he set up a robotic assembly line. It's bad enough the robots knew nothing about skating, but Sardini was too cheap to keep them oiled, and he used the cheapest parts in the world. That's just wonderful. So you play as the recently deceased Polterguy, who's out for revenge on Vito Sardini and his family by doing your best Beetlejuice bioexorcist impression in their house. Nobody can see you since you're technically dead. Instead, you plant these things called fritems and random objects around the home. So, for example, in this room, I can see Vito's wife. I planted a fritem in the clock on the fireplace, and when she goes near it, the clock turns into a giant pulsating eyeball, and she totally freaks out. And that's basically the game, just going around finding objects to interact with and trying to torment this family. Sometimes you can even take control of an object briefly, like this skull that flies out of the kid's dresser. Their fear level steadily continues to increase, and eventually they'll run out of the room. Your ability to plant fritems and objects comes at the cost of glowing green ectoplasm. You only have so much to go around, and if you scare the family enough to leave a room, they'll leave some more behind. If you run too low, you'll drop down into an underworld where little drops fall here and there while stuff flies out of the wall and tries to grab you. My favorite thing about this game is the graphics. Like I said before, it feels like a computer game. It's like some sadistic version of The Sims. And the frights aren't PG. You see severed limbs on the table saw, blood coming out of the rug, a severed head on the butcher board, and you can't help but laugh at the family's terrified reactions. Sometimes they even literally get the pants scared off of them. The expressions on their faces are priceless, and there's a dark sense of humor about all of this that's wonderfully macabre. The game does tend to get a little more difficult as it goes on, if you genuinely try to beat it, but the cool thing is there's always more than one way to win. Definitely check this one out if you get a chance. And no list of spooky titles on the Genesis is complete without Ghouls and Ghosts. Released in arcades in 1988 and ported to the Genesis a year later. They did an excellent job with this version, as it's one of the best platformers on the Sega Genesis. Nothing special about the story here. It's a sequel in the Ghosts and Goblins series that you probably played on the NES at some point. You take up the role of King Arthur, a brave knight battling evil forces through all sorts of sinister settings. The gameplay is excellent, and the graphics and sound are stellar for the time, especially considering this was released early in the console's lifespan. The only drawback here is the difficulty. I'm not shy about the fact that I'm terrible at just about every game in this series. I guess it's just a matter of having not spent enough time with it when I was younger. I've beaten Ninja Gaiden before, but success in this series still evades me. What about you? Did you ever get very far in any of these games? What are some of your other favorite scary titles on the Genesis or any other console? Hey, this week marks my 4th year on YouTube. My first official Friday Night Arcade video launched in late October of 2014. I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of you for watching, whether you've been with me since the beginning or only recently discovered the channel. Thank you so much for all of your support these past 4 years. This channel has already grown further than I ever thought it would, and I have all of you to thank for that. As always, have a great weekend, please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.